And she's there for 7 years asking herself, Lord, where were you when I needed you? And then one day while she's in the prison, she has this unique revelation. She understands and realizes, oh my goodness, God placed me in prison because I am uniquely qualified to share the gospel with
Mm.
other women who would never listen to someone from the outside.
God uses those of us who feel so inadequate and so ill-equipped to do his work. And we've talked about this so many times on the podcast that all we have to be willing to do is say, yes, yes, Lord, we'll do this. We will do what you've called us to do, because in the end, he gets all the glory for it. We never get to say, look at how great I was. You know, if I had a doctorate in education, I could be like, yeah, of course I can homeschool my kids. This is what I do. This is my thing. But no, that's not how God created me. And so he gets all the glory in the end, because all I can do is say, okay, Lord, you did this. I didn't do this. And I trusted you, and God just did his work. And so it's the same with testimonies and the testimonies that God gives us. And that's an incredible testimony just simply about homeschooling. But I want to talk about testimonies too, in regards to what God has done in other people's lives. And I was just looking at some scripture as we were preparing for this episode. And one of the ones that really stuck out to me was this. It's Psalm 35, verse 28. It's actually verse 27 and 28. And it says this: let those who delight in my righteousness shout for joy and be glad, and say evermore, great is the Lord who delights in the welfare of his servant. Then my tongue shall tell of your righteousness and of your praise all the day long. And what I love about that is it's not just about giving praise to God, but it's about sharing what he has done in our lives. So I would love for you to share some stories with us, because you're in a world of the Compelled podcast where you get to talk to people all the time about what God has done in their lives. I would love for you to share with us some of those stories. And later this week, actually on Thursday, I think, we're going to share a little clip from the Compelled podcast so that people can get a little taste of it, and we'll have you intro that. But talk to us about some of these testimonies that God has allowed you to be privy to.
Sure. You know, so the way that we started this podcast was about 5 years ago. My wife and I, we were talking about things and ways that we could serve the Lord. And one of the things that we realized is that because she grew up in Kansas, I lived in Texas, and we had completely different friend groups. And we happened to just know an abnormally large number of people because, you know, our entire lives, like, you know, melded together in one piece. And so we just knew so many people, and we realized that so many of them had really unique and intriguing testimonies and stories how God had changed or transformed their life. And so we launched our podcast, Compelled, as basically a way to highlight folks that we personally knew that had really powerful stories, but maybe weren't famous. You know, they didn't have a platform. They didn't have a podcast over there. They were just regular folks doing, you know, kingdom work. And we just thought, man, this is just be really encouraging. When I heard it, I think it'd be encouraging for someone else to hear it. One of those stories that comes to mind right now is a lady that I knew growing up as a kid, and her name was Carol Everett, and she was an abortion clinic owner. She owned 3 different clinics back in the 70s, before Roe versus Wade, actually, or maybe it was shortly after, I can't recall. And she profited off of thousands of abortions. In fact, I think they did about 30,000 abortions at her clinics. And at the time, she would have said that she was a Christian. In fact, she went to church every single Sunday. She kept a Bible at her abortion clinic. Every morning, she would wake up and say, "Dear Jesus, please don't let any women die in my clinic today." And then she would tithe 10% of every dollar that she made to her local church. So obviously, incredibly misguided, right? Like she had no real moral scruples about abortion at all. And so this lady, though, like she has this incredible testimony, though, of how one day God sends this guy into her office, and he starts talking with her about some legal issues that she's having with one of her co-owners. And it's incredible that God uses this arbitrator to basically be the impetus for changing her entire perspective, not only of abortion, but of Christianity itself. And it ultimately brings her into the Christian faith. And today, Carol's like this 70-year-old lady. She's still working on the front lines of like trying to save babies now. But unless you knew her story, you'd have no idea. She was just this old lady, right? You have no clue at all. And she was just someone that I knew growing up. And we were like, wow, what if we just shared that story with others? And so that's one of the stories that we started with.
That's so cool. How do you get your guests? Because I mean, I know you said you and your wife knew people, but obviously you don't know every single person that you have on the podcast. How do these people come to you?
Yeah, great question. So, a lot of the stories that we find now, these are friends of friends, or sometimes there'll be a cold call. One other story that comes to my mind, this was a friend of a friend. Her name was Hannah Overton. And actually, I've got a photo of her right here. We have these little cards that we have. So for those that are watching on YouTube, you can see this little card here.
Yeah.
And Hannah Overton, she was a homeschool mother, grew up in Texas, lived in Texas, and I think she had 6 kids, and they were in the process of adopting their 6th. And unfortunately, this little boy that they were adopting, he died when he was about 5 years old. He died while they were in their care. And it was just terrible, traumatic. A lot of stuff happened. CPS got involved and ended up accusing Hannah of murdering her foster child, which was, completely bogus, not true, not at all. And so they went to trial because Hannah was a believer. She knew that the Lord was going to save her in her day of, of torment here. And of course, she's just going through all this anguish. Like, this is her son, right? The boy that they were adopting, he had died, and now she's being accused. I mean, just crazy stuff's going on. And so at the trial, all this crazy stuff happens. The prosecutor was basically corrupt and basically withheld a whole bunch of evidence from the jury. They had a special witness that they kept in a closet, didn't even let the witness testify to the jury what was going on. So the jury had no clue. And so at the end, the jury has to come back with a verdict, guilty or not guilty. And so they say, well, guilty. And in that case, in Texas law, at that point, the only 2 options are either death or life in prison. That's the only options the jury was given. And so they chose life in prison for this mom. And so Hannah is just shocked leaving the courtroom, like, Lord, where were you? Like, I was praying. I thought you were going to rescue me here. I'm innocent.
Yeah.
What in the world's going on? And she's sent to life in prison with other, hardened criminals, rapists and murderers, and terrible folks are in there. And she's there for 7 years asking herself, Lord, where were you when I needed you? And then one day, while she's in the prison, she has this unique revelation. She understands and realizes, oh my goodness, God placed me in prison because I am uniquely qualified to share the gospel with other women who would never listen to someone from the outside, but they would listen to me. And so that began this revival in the Texas prison system as Hannah began having Bible studies and witnessing to other women in prison, and they would then have Bible studies with other women in prison, and soon thousands of women, their lives were transformed in the Texas prison system. And eventually, the prosecutor left office, a new prosecutor came in, found the physical box of evidence that the previous prosecutor had hidden, which showed Hannah's innocence. The Texas Court of Criminal Appeals reversed the ruling, and they allowed Hannah to go free. She's been exonerated, and so she's free today. But that story, again, this is just a friend of a friend. We got that connection, a friend of a friend.
Wow.
And we were like, oh my goodness, this is a story that the world needs to hear.
That was actually one of my favorite episodes. I don't know. I have a lot of favorite episodes, but that was one of them that was so powerful as we listened to it. And the thing that really struck me about hers is, again, as we said before, she was just a mom. She was a homeschool mom.
Yeah.
And how her community came around her. And I remember she was talking about how her friends homeschooled her kids for her. I mean, that's incredible. That's incredible sacrifice. And her family just hung on in hopes that God would just reclaim her life and renew what had been lost. And he did. And now I would love for you to tell really quickly about where she's at today. And people can go and listen to this episode, of course, and get the whole story because it's absolutely fascinating. But where is she today? What is she doing today?
Yeah, great question. So when she was originally sent to prison, she had 5 kids at that time, right? And the youngest one, she was actually still nursing the youngest one when the jury came back and said guilty, and she was sent to, she was locked up and just sent away. No goodbyes. She didn't say goodbye to her family because she literally thought of course the jury's going to say I'm innocent. And so she left her family for 7 years. And when I interviewed her, actually, what was so surreal is she had left that little baby, right? And now that when she was set free, that little baby was 8 years old now. But when my wife and I interviewed Hannah, she actually had a new baby. And Hannah is actually the first woman in modern Texas history who has ever been exonerated to still have a child after prison. Because all other scenarios in modern history, so we're talking the last 100 years, all other
Yeah.
women that's ever happened to have either like lost their fertility by the time they get out of prison, because they were exonerated, but it was too late, or just
Right.
it's crazy stuff there. But it was just so
Yeah.
surreal to see Hannah. So today she's got this ministry. She's working with other prisoners. They have a letter writing ministry, and they do Christmas gifts for other prisoners and their children. A really powerful testimony that she's got. And you can learn all about that back at our website if you just search for her story with Hannah Overton at our website.
Homeschool Insights is sponsored by CTC Math. If you're looking for a great online math program, visit ctcmath.com and try it for free. For more great homeschool inspiration and resources, listen to the Schoolhouse Rocked podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday.